Alright, friends, this is the Banker of Pippo YouTube channel. I'm Bryce, and this is another episode of the Handmaid's Tale Talk for Season 4, Episode 8, which has been absolutely wild. But first, ladies and gentlemen, this is a spoiler discussion, so if you haven't seen Season 4, Episode 8 of The Handmaid's Tale and don't want it spoiled for you, go back, watch the episode, then come back to this video. Otherwise, if you don't care about spoilers and are just here to hang out, welcome. We're going to have a good time. So, Season 4, Episode 8. This has been my favorite episode of the season so far. This was absolutely phenomenal. A lot of emotional payoff. And what I really like about it is this episode just centers around essentially one thing, and that's June. We get a whole ton of June in this episode, and I think it's been what I've been craving all season long. It seems like the season has basically had to go through a few different stories in each episode. Like a lot of times we'll see it through the perspective of June separately. We'll see it how everything's going in Canada separately. We're seeing how everything is going in Gilead separately. And now it's starting to all kind of come together into one, which is a lot easier to wrap my head around. So if you guys feel the same way, let me know. But I just really enjoyed that piece of the episode. So essentially what this episode was is just June getting into Canada and now readjusting to having a life of freedom, which she hasn't had in a very, very long time. And I got some of my biggest questions answered in this episode. So to kind of kick it off, the show makes the most mundane of tasks very significant to us as the audience. We get a lot of emotional payoff. So basically the episode starts off, June is getting off of the boat. She is now on Canadian soil. And they take her to a really, really nice hotel that they don't really take a lot of refugees to. Apparently, they have certain designated areas throughout Canada that are specifically for refugees, but they've taken June to a really nice place. It's like a 5-star hotel. There's bellhops. There's room service even. You could just tell by the architecture of the place. This place is top-notch. I believe it's even got marble walls and ground and ceilings and whatever. It's immaculate. It's beautiful. But anyway, so they get into the hotel. Luke is like, all right, June, I'll order us up some room service. June goes ahead and just changes clothes and takes a shower. And this is where we get, I think, one of the most powerful moments in the episode, but it turns in taking a shower, which is a very mundane task for a lot of people in the world, and turns it into something really significant. We see June just kind of slowly get into the shower and just slowly walk into this nice warm water, and it occurred to me, it's like, wow, June probably hasn't been able to have that in such a long time, because in Gilead, every time, at least from what I can recall, every single time I've seen June get to bathe, it's usually been a bath. It's never been a shower, which I don't know if that's completely true or not. I just don't remember her ever really being able to shower. It's always been baths. So if any of you guys know any instances of her having to shower while in Gilead, feel free to drop them down in the comments below. But I just thought it was a very significant moment, and she just gets to sit there and enjoy an activity she hasn't gotten to in such a long time. And I got to give a lot of credit to the cinematography and the makeup artists in this case, because the camera kind of pans to June's back, and we see a lot of the scars and bruises that she's gotten throughout the season with her gunshot wound, with everything else that she's pretty much been through in Chicago, and we all kind of see everything kind of come to fruition. And now it's basically the show's really subtle way of saying she's made it, she's safe now, and it just reminds us of everything that she's been through up to that point. So it's a really powerful scene that turns the most mundane of tasks into something really, really significant too. But then June gets out of the shower, and then she ends up crashing for 17 hours, according to Luke. She wakes up the next day, and Luke kind of says, yeah, I remember you always used to take long sleeps after accomplishing something great, and this is probably one of the best things he's ever accomplished, saving 83 people from a terrible place like Gilead, and now coming home and being safe herself. That is no small feat for sure. So the next thing that happens is Luke and June end up having a conversation about Hannah. Luke basically says, which has been on my mind, at least in the last few episodes, it's probably been too long, she's probably forgotten about us. And June says, no, she hasn't. And she goes into the first conversation June ever had with Hannah, which was the very beginning of season 2, when her and Emily are about to leave Gilead, and she wants to grab Hannah on the way out, try to sneak her out, and they talk, and June essentially says, I told her that we love her very much, we did everything we could to get her out, and in that basically that Hannah didn't forget about her and Luke, and that they'll always be her parents and whatnot. And I think it gave Luke a lot of closure, because obviously when you don't see your own child for that long and you don't know what's happened to her, it'll essentially help him sleep at night knowing that she is growing older. She is in good health as far as the show has shown us. But then I think the one thing that weighs on June in telling the story to Luke is the fact that the last time June saw Hannah, which was just a couple episodes ago, Hannah was scared of June, which we didn't really get a whole lot of closure on that encounter after that. So I think it's really interesting to see how the rest of that's going to play out. I still have questions about what will happen to Hannah overall, but you can tell it's still weighing on June, even though she's given Luke that little bit of closure as well. So, anyways, I gotta give, and one thing I want to say with this particular scene too is I gotta give a ton of credit to Elisabeth Moss and O.T. Fegbenley, I think his name is, if I'm saying that correctly. They really bring it in this particular scene. It was probably one of my favorite scenes in the entirety of The Handmaid's Tale. It was just so emotional, so powerful. It was very hard to watch it without, getting in the feels a little bit in your chest. So they did a phenomenal job in executing the scene. So, and now the next thing we sort of get into is that agent, the Canadian agent who has been coming around and dealing with Fred and Serena, Rita in some cases, now comes back to June and starts to debrief her because of the fact that she obviously has a ton of information about Gilead that Canada can use, perhaps to prosecute Fred and Serena and for other very valuable things as well. I believe the phrase that they used for her was valuable intelligence asset, is the politically correct term for it. So they start to debrief June, which makes a ton of sense, right? Because June has been through hell, and she wants to make Gilead pay for what they've put her through, and that includes Fred and Serena. So it makes sense why they'd want to debrief her, because she'd have a ton of information to share that would help them as well. So, but in the middle of this conversation, Luke kind of stops June and says, "Hey, do you want to go see Nicole?" Because remember, Nicole is safe in Canada with Luke and Moira, and June hasn't essentially seen Nicole since she was born. Really, it's been a long time, and we can see that she's a few years old now at least. So June says, "Yeah, that sounds good." And the Canadian agent kind of stops them for a second and says, "Hey, it's a lot better if we get this debriefing done sooner, because otherwise your mind gets fuzzier on details as you get new memories, like being free." And Luke just kind of says something very subtle but very powerful. He says, "I'm going to take my wife and we are going to go see our daughter." And the fact that he used the phrase "our daughter," just it showed a lot of love and care for Nicole. Even though that Luke isn't Nicole's biological father, he still loves her as such and loves June just the same. Nothing's changed. So I thought that was a really nice subtle touch for the episode, and it gave us as the audience a preview into how Luke feels about things. And I absolutely loved it. It was consistent with this character, and it made me love Luke even more. So the Canadian agent doesn't argue, obviously. He says, "I understand." They go about their merry way. And now we get into a portion of the episode where June is starting to adapt to life, essentially, in Canada, a life of being free. She goes home, she sees Nicole. She wants to go to the supermarket. She wants to hang out with her friends and whatnot. There was one particular moment in this, which is where I'll start with June adapting to life, is where the first morning she wakes up in Canada. It's a bright, shining sun. It's so bright that it's glowing through the curtains. It's shining up on her. She kind of wakes up. She looks around. And the show zooms in on the Statue of Liberty on, I believe, the corner of a dresser. And it just kind of is a subtle reminder that, hey, June is free now. The Statue of Liberty resembles America, which is essentially freedom for June, or at least that's how June sees it. So I thought that was a really nice subtle touch. But anyways, going into a little bit more into June's adjustment, Moira is about to take Nicole to the supermarket so Luke and June can just kind of hang out, talk, get reacclimated with each other. But June says, "I want to go to the supermarket." And they're like, "Are you sure?" She's like, "Yeah, I want to go to the supermarket." So they all go to the supermarket together, and a lot happens here in a really short amount of time. So I'll just start off with this first. A really nice touch this episode is that June and Luke are going down the aisle and they pass potato chips. And June says to Luke, "When did they change potato chips?" Because there's so many different kinds of potato chips. There's organic, there's natural, there's all kinds of different things. And Luke says something that answered one of my biggest questions this entire season and series, really, which is how long has June been in Gilead? And Luke replies to June, yeah, they've changed chips a lot in the last 7 years. So for me, my head almost exploded because I was really pumped to finally hear how long June has been in Gilead, because that was just one of the biggest questions I had on my mind, and especially for Hannah and Nicole too. So it sounds like June's been in Gilead for 7 years, so that just painted a picture for me in my mind. That's a long time. That's nearly a decade. That's a long, significant portion of life. So it makes June's adjustment to life in Canada even more jarring. But anyways, so what happens next is Moira is pushing a separate cart with Nicole in it, while Luke and June are using another cart and going elsewhere throughout the store. Nicole starts crying. Moira's running around and is like, all right, I need to change her now before she has a fit. And then Luke's like, oh, here you go. Extra diapers, because Moira had run out. And they're like, thanks. And it just showed a bit of, it was a moment of teamwork and endearment between Moira and Luke. The fact that they have worked like a well-oiled machine so pleasantly, lovingly to Nicole. And it shows us as the audience that, hey, Nicole is loved and she is taken care of and has been taken care of while June's been in Gilead. So it was a very touching moment seeing people work as a team in order to help care for somebody else. It was just a really nice moment, and again shows us more as to where Moira and Luke are at with the entire situation. So really nice, pleasant touch for this episode. Now, the most significant moment I think that came from June being in the supermarket is she starts having some PTSD, some flashbacks. I don't know if PTSD is the technically correct term for it, but that's the thing I can think of that's closest to what she went through. Essentially, June goes to grab a bag of potato chips off the shelf. Once she does that, there is an opening in the shelves to where she can see the next aisle. And she starts having visions of Alma, because out of all the times that June and Alma would go to the supermarket, they would communicate through those shelves. They would quietly talk to each other, pick things off the shelf, talk to each other, go about their merry way. It's the way that they communicated without being really noticed by the eyes or the other aunts that were patrolling around. So, and June sees these two ladies who are dressed in red outfits, and she like is running around because she thinks she's still seeing handmaids, but no, it's just regular citizens in Canada. And she starts panicking a little bit. You can see her visibly start to not feel so great. And then she sees a bottle of water and a brand and a logo. And it looks like wings. It looks like wings. And they remind her of the wings in Gilead that she had seen so many times. So then that triggers more flashbacks too to all the pain that Serena, Aunt Lydia, and mainly Fred caused her. And I find it interesting that the flashbacks only go through those three people, but they were the source of a lot of her pain. So I guess it kind of makes sense. And you can just tell she like has to like stop and like sit in the store for a second. Like she's having a panic attack. And then after that, just kind of ends scene and they end up back home. Why do I say it's probably one of the most significant portions of the scene of her being in the supermarket in general? It's because it's the show's way of showing us that June still, despite being free, is adapting and coping with things that have happened. She isn't quite right. She doesn't feel right. She's obviously going to have some coping mechanisms with everything that's happened in her life in Gilead, and it makes sense because it shows that she's still kind of dealing with it a little bit, still adjusting. And I thought the show did a good job in showcasing that to us. So now we fast forward, we get into the next major part of the episode, which is June hanging out with friends at the house. So June invites over Rita, Emily, and obviously Moira, because practically lives there for the most part. And they all just kind of sit around, get to talking about how Gilead affected them even after they left Gilead, which is really interesting because it's like, how do handmaids and Martha's deal with being in Gilead for so long and then escaping it and now readapting to normal life? I thought that was very interesting. They talked about things like intimacy issues, etc., and so forth. I'm trying to remember everything that they really talked about, but I just thought it was an interesting touch for the show. And Rita starts to talk a little bit about her visit to Serena. If you recall, just about an episode or two ago, she went and saw both Fred and Serena. And June starts kind of probing and asking questions to Rita, like, what did she say? What happened? All this other stuff, because obviously June is curious. And Rita mentions that Serena was pregnant. And then she asks, was it Fred's? And I believe she says yes at that point. And you could see June start to get visibly angry and flustered, and obviously for many, many reasons. One, previously in the show, when June was first pregnant with Nicole, it was sort of assumed that there's no way Fred could be the father because there was some ambiguities as to whether or not Fred was, what's the term I'm looking for, sterile. Like his he basically couldn't make children. I guess it's a really awkward way to put it, but so then it to us as the audience, it said, okay, the only possible way for June to get pregnant was through Nick. And now with Fred essentially being a father, it's like, okay, that opens up the option then that Fred could be Nicole's biological father. But also, the second reason is the fact that June has a genuine hatred for Serena and Fred, which obviously no one blames her for that. Like, that is totally justified and normal. And hearing that Serena or Fred is getting any sort of pleasantries or pleasure or satisfaction in anything, which in this case is a child, is probably really aggravating for her because it's like in her mind she's like, they don't deserve this happiness. Look what all the lives they've destroyed. And again, makes total sense, and she gets visibly upset about it. So really powerful moment, really powerful scene, and again showing how June is kind of coping and adjusting with things that are going on as she adjusts to life in Canada. So then we fast forward to later on that evening. June obviously can't sleep because she's probably thinking about what Rita's told her. And so she calls the agent, the Canadian agent that she's been talking to. I keep forgetting his name, so I apologize for that, guys, but I'll have to look up his name later. For some reason, I cannot remember it. But anyways, they meet up, and the reason why she called the Canadian agent was to meet up with Serena and talk to her. And again, we get another really powerful moment with June where she goes into this room to talk to Serena, and Serena says that something along the lines of, God has brought you here to me, and he's given me this baby and everything. And June kind of says something really, really slick, and I really enjoyed. She goes, yeah, you would thank God for that because you never wanted to give me credit for anything. And I was like, damn, like June is going straight for the throat. She is not messing around. She is here for business or whatever she does. And Serena says something along the lines of like she wants to make amends for what she's done in order to have a great life with her baby boy. And June says a lot of things, and the one thing that stuck out to me was she goes, you know why God gave you that baby, Serena? It's so that when he takes it away, you could just feel 1 ounce of, I think it was dread or anger. I forgot what emotion June said, but you could feel 1 ounce of, we'll say, anger that we felt for all of you guys taking away our children and prying them from our arms. And it was like, oh my gosh, holy shit. Like June was really like, you could see she hates Serena. Like if the hatred wasn't evident before, wow, it certainly was now. And it showed June's motivation to do anything she could to basically make Fred and Serena pay for what do you call it? The hellish life they've made for so many in Gilead. So the episode then cuts to June going home. Her and Luke have a few intimate moments, and for me, what the whole entire sequence of events leading up to that showed was that so June is coping with what has happened in the past, right? Well, now with June actually going and seeing Serena, she's actually actively doing something about that anger, that grief, and actually coping with it in such a way that helps her. And I got to give her a ton of credit because it shows her how powerful she is as a person and how advanced her mental state is to not just, I guess, marinate on things, but do something about it in order to kind of help herself in this case. So really, really strong mentally June has become through her experiences, and it was really interesting to see that come to fruition in this episode too. So what else am I missing real quick before I start to wrap up this episode? So I think aside from June, like aside from this episode and her visiting Serena and showing us that she's dealing with her mental state, it shows that she is ready to adjust to having a free life again. She's ready to go out there, live her life, and do anything that she can to basically make Gilead pay for what they've done. And if that includes helping by being debriefed by Canadian officials in order to help them in their fight against Gilead, then she's absolutely gung-ho on board with it. And that's how the episode actually ends. She continues that debriefing session with the Canadian officer that she started at the beginning. She had that time to readjust to her life, start to get reacclimated to things, gets to see her husband again, her best friends again, gets to have a normal, free life, and just a little taste of it. And now she's ready to continue with whatever she really wants to do in life, including the fight against Gilead and also living a life she wants at the same time. So really, really awesome episode overall. Some thoughts that I have going into the next one is I'm still curious to see what will happen to Hannah over time. The jury's out on that, so to speak. We still don't have any answers on Janine. Take that for what you will. I don't think we'll hear anything about her for a while now either. And also, I'm anticipating we'll get a little bit more of Commander Lawrence, Nick, and Aunt Lydia over in Gilead and what they've got going on too as the series evolves. But I think this episode was a nice break from that. And lastly, how is June going to continue her coping with everything that's going on? Is she still going to have some struggles going forward? How's that going to go? Because her, like I said, her mental state seems to be very, very strong right now, but it's like, will that falter at all? We'll have to see as the episodes go on. So, ladies and gentlemen, like I said, this was my favorite episode of The Handmaid's Tale this season. What did you think of it? Whatever you thought, comment below and let me know. Until the very next episode of The Handmaid's Tale Talk, this has been it for Season 4, Episode 8. This has been the Bankrupt Hippo channel. I've been Bryce. Until next video, have a great day.